Welcome to Asake Online. My name is Zenzele Ndebele, and this is the platform where we talk about all sorts of things that are happening in Zimbabwe, in Africa, and the world. We talk about politics, we talk about social issues, we talk about human rights. And today's program, we'll be talking to Rose Hanzi. I think I got the name right. Hanzi. When someone says Hanzi, I always thought Kutweni. That kind of thing. But yeah, we'll be talking to soon to be the outgoing Executive Director of the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights. If you are an activist in Zimbabwe, or you are a politician, or you are dealing with human rights, I'm certain that you've dealt with Rose at some point. Either you were arrested, you were asking for help, you were asking for legal assistance, or you know someone that you referred them over an issue. In my many years that I've known them, I've dealt with them a lot when I was in trouble, when I needed advice, when I was referring to other people whose rights had been violated, and they've been doing a lot of good work across Zimbabwe. But in this program, we want to reflect on her journey as she's exiting the space, to find out what has been her experience, and also what are the lessons that she has learned, and going forward, for those who are staying behind, what can we expect? Rose, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I know it's always difficult talking to lawyers and to people who are in human rights work. But to start with, I like history, and I would like you to give us just a brief background.
Thank you, and it has been a long time. I was hoping to come and have this session with you because I've seen some of your recordings, and I was like, no, I still need to talk to Zenzele to have a conversation with you. So I suppose you want to know where I come from.
Yes, brief background.
I come from the Midlands. That is where my rural home is.
So did you come from?
From the Midlands.
Okay, with the president.
Yes, but I suppose I'm in the wrong basket. I always tell people that I come from the Midlands, but I think I'm in the wrong basket, and for me, that's the best basket that I will be in. So my ancestry, I'm a Rose descendant, and I'm really proud to be a Rose descendant because my father always used to talk about the history, that we are the ones who are supposed to have built the great Zimbabwe. And yes, and I like history. I love history. When I was at school, I enjoyed history a lot. I did it even for advanced level. And I always find it quite strange that when people think about lawyers, especially the science people at the University of Zimbabwe, they'll be teasing lawyers to say, no, you are the ones who just know about, stories. You don't really know, academic stuff. You are just, historians and, language people. But I find history to be quite fascinating. And I suppose maybe because of my ancestry, it has drawn me to where I am today, and also my passion to serve people of Zimbabwe and to do human rights work. So I started doing human rights work actually when I was young. So when I was at the University of Zimbabwe, I joined the legal aid clinic at the law faculty. That was in the second year. And most of the time there would be spent assisting indigent people to fill out, forms or file cases. So we had files, and then we would assist them to draft as self-actors, as students, and then they would go on their way. And then when I was in the third year, getting into the fourth year, there were some food riots in Harare. And one of my cousins then said, Professor Felto actually was looking for people to assist, because there was an organization that needed assistance in documenting and interviewing victims of torture and human rights abuses. So there were many people who were being assaulted. For just walking on the streets, there were these dragnet arrests, arbitrary assaults, and there were too many for the organization that was dealing with them at that time to manage. So they wanted students. So it was me and one of my other cousins. I won't mention her name because she's in the corporate world now. So every day we would go to an office that was in town, along Chinamano. There was an NGO there that would let out some of their space to us, like the cottage. So we would first of all report at the main office of the Zimbabwe Human Rights NGO Forum, which was at that time at Eastgate. I think it was Blue Bridge. I don't remember the floor because that was like in 2002. and then would then go and wait for the clients to come. So they would come, tell their stories. So we had to record their stories in affidavit format. Because from there, when you get the instructions, then you then can proceed to do all the other processes like the notices of intention to sue and then the summons. But what really struck me from that time, I was still a student, was the pattern and the trends that were coming out from these stories, the role of the state security agents, particularly the military and also the police, but mainly the military, because they were the ones who were arbitrarily assaulting people. And some of them were severely tortured. So that really, from that time, it really affected me that citizens, innocent citizens, were being assaulted by the state that is supposed to protect them. So from then on, I never really looked back, because even after graduating, I continued, because we still had to try and push the files. I think we had hundreds of them. I don't remember how many, but there were too many for the lawyers to cope with that NGO. So we then proceeded to do the notices of intention to sue for all of them, and then also the summons commencing action. And then eventually we had to leave because, of course, the internship was time-bound. And then from there, I went into practice briefly. And then in practice, then I was already a member of Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, a student member. And then I remember when I was in practice, I used to work at one of the firms which was close to the Law Society, where the Law Society still is. So there was a bit of a distance for me to walk to the High Court and to the Magistrates Court. And then the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights offices were along 4th Street. So I would pass by the offices sometimes, especially around tea time, and then just have tea and then chat with the lawyers there. So it was like a routine. If I'm going to court, I know I'm going to rest at ZLHR offices, have tea, chat with them, and then go to court and then go back. So I maintained that relationship with the organization, and then I would do other activities like trainings of human rights defenders, writing reports for workshops, and then also doing some cases. So actually, if you Google my name, you'll find that one of the first cases that I did was for the women of Zimbabwe Arise in 2004. Actually, that was the first encounter with Jane Williams. And I think, we hit it off like a house on fire. So I then continued to represent Jenny until I was arrested with her group in 2009.
So, like from your story, you can tell that from university you're already, into this human rights work. So at what point did you say, I think this is my passion and I'm going to follow it up?
So when I was at university in the 3rd year, actually in the 1st year, I did some research. There was a research that was being done by this organization on wills, inheritance, and HIV and AIDS policies, like in 2001. So I went out with, we were paired. So I went out with one of my classmates and friends, and we went to Tamanda in Chipinge. I'd never been to Chipinge. We went to the tea estates, Tanganda, and then we also went to Chireds and Triangle. So we're gathering information for that study. I think from then on, which was quite early, I realized that I enjoyed working with people, and then I enjoyed certain subjects.
Yeah.
So I was naturally drawn into human rights. And during the 3rd year, I enjoyed public international law a lot. At that time, there was no human rights law course at the University of Zimbabwe. So the public international law course, I enjoyed some of the cases that were coming out, particularly around state responsibility, the obligation of states to protect their citizens. I enjoyed those cases a lot, like, when there are ships that are lost at ocean, and then countries take each other to the International Court of Justice. So I realized that the courses that I enjoyed a lot, succession, which was about wills. I also enjoyed the criminal law. I think that's why maybe human rights defenders was quite attractive for me. The law of evidence, criminal procedure. So I had certain courses that I really enjoyed: constitutional law, Roman Dutch law to some extent, and then jurisprudence, of course, was confusing, but you had to do it. So there were some courses that drew me in, and I then ended up writing on women's rights for my 1st degree dissertation. And it was about reproductive self-determination. So the title was quite catchy, but I think I tried to cover the issues. It was about how women were controlled by society on when they should give birth, how they were controlled by the legislature, and how other factors would control them. They could not decide when. So the title was To Bear or Not to Bear, Reproductive Self-Determination as a Human Right.
No, you're mentioning this issue of self-determination when it comes to reproductive health. And right now, I saw the churches and other actors coming out and say they don't really agree with the amendment to the Abortion Act. And what would be your view on that?
I'm a Catholic, so I'm going to say this and then I'll go and confess. So I still stand by what I stood by when I wrote my first degree dissertation. Unfortunately, for me, there's the pro-life and the pro-choice schools of thought. And for me, it's more of pro-choice because I still believe that it's the woman's body and they should have the autonomy to determine when they give birth. So I'll go and confess later, but I stand by that pro-choice.
So at some point, you become the director of the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights. First day in the office, what strikes you?
Actually, yes, when I became the director, I wasn't really looking forward to becoming a director. I was actually thinking of leaving Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, but then it happened anyway. And then I realized, okay, maybe this leadership thing is going to grow on me, which it did actually. It did so fast. So the first thing that really struck me was, as I was easing myself into the role, initially I was thinking, there are some stakeholders that you meet and they want to understand the situation of human rights in Zimbabwe, but in a different way. They want you to make comments about politics. Politics and human rights.
Yeah.
You cannot separate them. So the first days I was actually thinking, oh my God, how am I going to manage this? Should I do another degree in political science? Or maybe I use the political science module that I did for my master's in human rights. So I then decided, no, I'm not going to do another degree. I'm just going to use my understanding of political science from my master's module, because I did a master's in human rights and democratization in Africa. So the democratization was the politics. So what also struck me was that being a female in the position that I was in was going to be tough. Because from the first days, the early days, you'd get calls, people saying, you're very difficult to work with, you don't bend. And then we need to talk about it because people are saying you're a difficult person to work with, you're not flexible. And then I was wondering, what type of flexibility do people want me to be? And then I was like, no, I'll just do my work. And then my work is going to speak for itself, which happened. But also, I then quickly realized that when you're a female, you need to assert yourself, because of the nature of our society. It's very patriarchal. And I was very lucky from my background that with my father, he had different values. My father gave all his children equal opportunities. So I have a sister, and then I have 4 brothers. So for him, he was quite impressed because my sister started to do law. She's like 2 years older than me. And then he also wanted me to do law, which I did. My generation would listen to your parent. If they say become a teacher, you'd become a teacher. Do law, you'd do law. Go and work there, that's my generation, not the generation Z, because I've got my son who is in that generation. They don't listen, they're different. So I realized that the patriarchy challenge was not just with the legal profession, because I am coming from a very special position because I'm a lawyer, a member of the Law Society, and then I'm in this sector, which is supposed to be the civil society sector where they respect women's rights and gender equality. But I quickly realized that that was not the case in the civil society sector. It was almost the same as in the legal sector, because in the law society, when I joined, there were very few female lawyers. And also there were very few female lawyers who were in practice. Most female lawyers would join and then they would go into corporate because they don't want any confrontation. And also maybe because of the challenges that they get with the male counterparts, where, of course, they're always being challenged and they're being undermined. So I then realized, no, but in this sector, it's almost similar, A female, there's a boys' club. So I quickly got to know about the boys' club, And for the boys, it was easy. They hang around, they have drinks. And sometimes they even solicit for funding when they're having their drinks. And they take care of each other. They exclude the women. And for the women, because of our gendered roles, you'd find that most of the colleagues They finish work, they go home, they become mothers, they become caregivers. There's no time for you to sit around, hang around, have drinks. And then also because of the sector that you're in, you have to be careful what you do. You just don't go around, clubbing or having fun.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of surveillance that is happening on you. And also you don't want to be found in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then there's suddenly this scandalous article about what you were doing last night. So I found it quite different. And then I also had to be very measured in what I did. And then I had to choose my friends very carefully. So I'm not someone who likes to have too many friends. I have few friends because I believe in quality over quantity. And also because I didn't have the time. So suddenly I find myself as the acting executive director. I started off acting in September. And then I'm still having my dual role of managing the Human Rights Defenders Project, which was quite active at that time. When people get arrested, they call you. So now I had to look and see who do I delegate my other role to assist, because I couldn't manage the hotline and also be the director. So I did delegate to one of the senior lawyers, and then we managed to recruit managers to replace my position. But I found it quite a very difficult space at that time. And then I also found that there were some female directors who supported me a lot, They would check in on me, and of course they would make sure that if there was any calls for proposals or anything that was happening, we would have time to chat. And then I think for some time we thought we would have space and time to just meet and discuss, but it proved to be a challenge because of our roles as mothers, as caregivers. You don't really just find time, to sit, have a drink like the boys do.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was tough, but I think I made it. And I think for me, what really made a difference was most of the members that I was working with, I had started working with them as a manager. So the lawyers that would go out to do the work from the membership, they were used to my work ethic. And then also even the lawyers within Secretariat, it was quite easy when the transition happened for them to continue to support me. Of course, you always get one or two bad apples, but I really credit my team's support and also the fact that they believed in me. That really helped to ease the transition and for me to find my place as a leader. And as you grow into the leadership role, there's so many things that you then discover that for you to be a good leader, you also need to be a psychologist to some extent. So I always used to think we need to change the education system at the University of Zimbabwe, because I realized that in South Africa at one time, they used to require that people do a first degree before they do law. And I think that really helps. Because my predecessor, I think I had done that, and then she had psychology and law. So I tended to find the way that she responded to situations was different from what I did. But yeah.
So now that gives me the understanding why you read the books you read. And one of the books that you gave me, which I found interesting, was the 48 Laws of Power. And I think it has replaced my Bible now, because I now read it more than that. I read the Bible, and I even have I found the audio version of it, and this time I'm in the car, I'll be listening to that. So people always say, human rights law, or when you're in human rights work as a leader, is quite a lonely job. Did you find that experience?
I found it to be lonely. There are times when it's just too lonely and you wonder, but is it worth it? There's a lot of responsibility on you, and you need sometimes to make decisions very fast, and sometimes you have to make them on your own, and there are too many people that will be looking up to you. I found it quite difficult, especially over the last 4 or 5 years. When they introduced the Private Volunteer Organizations Amendment bill, that's when you find that leadership can be very lonely from different angles. So I think one of the funny things that came out was everyone thought that bill was introduced because of me, because of ZLHR, because of the work that we do, speaking out and, challenging government.
Yeah.
And then I told them at one time that, no, you may think that this is targeting Rose and Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, but no, it's also targeting you, even for those that are in the humanitarian sector. Because they may then want to control certain activities, and they'll use that bill. So I found that it was quite lonely. And then also when you come under attack as an organization, you may be out there assisting everyone, but when you're under attack, then you find that you're alone.
And no one actually comes to your rescue because people say, anyway, they do these things, they know them, but at that time, you're so vulnerable. You also need support, just like you give support.
Yeah, the last line of defense. I'll give an incident that happened even before I was the director. I think if you're following, in 2013, there was an incident where some minutes from our boardroom leaked.
Yeah.
And of course, the state-controlled media then released them I call them installments.
Yeah.
Because they did that every day for 7 days. And then the last day, they released all the minutes. And they, we're just thinking, how did this happen? But also, there was no one to support us. There's no one to support you. That's when you really find that it's lonely. Because if you come under attack as an individual, it's quite difficult. It will be very difficult for you to get people to support you. But then also, when you come in a situation where they're trying to regulate you, there's an uncertain future. When you go back home, you're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about your staff, your team. They are worried. They'll come to you every day for answers. And sometimes you don't have anyone to talk to about those issues. You have to talk to them and listen to them. So you're carrying on a lot of burden. You're carrying on a lot of responsibility. And it's very difficult for you to get someone to support you fully on that. You worry about fundraising on your own. You do have board members, but they come in for a few minutes, a few hours, and they go away. They go to their homes. And for them, it's a key responsibility that they gave you, that you should fundraise. Even if they've got a fundraising committee, they don't have time for you. So you have to worry about fundraising. You worry about the staff's security, safety. You worry about their welfare. When they are not well, you have to look after them. And that, I suppose, makes a difference when you're a leader. Because if you are not worried about that, then you are not leading an organization. You will not be leading a team at all.
So you describe your experience, how you worry about your staff, their safety, their welfare, and they always look up to you. And I'm reflecting on our national leadership, that we have guys who are supposed to be doing what you did. And you reflect, do you think the guys that we have in power would actually worry about what we have eaten, what we think about, or it's just about themselves?
I think from my own experience so far, well, I was born just before independence, so I don't know what happened before, when I was still in the womb. But I don't see them being leaders. Sometimes I see them as being rulers. Leadership and rulership are completely different. If you are leading, you have certain qualities that you show to the people that you're supposed to be leading. Firstly, I would say leaders almost always have a lot of humility. They're very humble people. And leaders listen to the people that they're supposed to be leading. And they do lead from the front, setting an example. So I would say from my own experience at Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights and what I've seen, I actually have, over the years, developed certain habits. Like when you get cash, whether it's going to be to buy to pay for the toll gate when you're traveling, you have to bring back the receipt to the organization to account for it. And for me as a leader, you should be very accountable and transparent and lead by example. So I have got this little pencil case that is see-through with a few Barbie dolls, of course, to make it more interesting, where I always throw in my receipts all the time because I have to account. And when I come back, one of the ladies in administration who assists me always laughs at me because I give her that thing sealed. And then we start looking at the receipts together. Because for me, that's how a leader should be, leading by example. But also for me, when I look at what is happening, I don't see these leaders leading by example at all. With leadership, you have to worry about the people because you're saving them. It's not about yourself. I see a lot of characteristics of people who are self-centered. They're worried about their own welfare, not the people that they're supposed to be leading and the people that put them in power. Because remember, with us, we're supposed to be a democratic state, or we're supposed to emulate democratic principles because we elect our leaders through a first past the post process. And as such, I feel that they don't understand the contract that is there between the electorate and themselves. They are not worried about the welfare of the people. So you tend to find that before the elections, they'll campaign, they'll make all those promises, the manifestos, and then after they're in power, they completely forget their promises. And then it's about them. It's about their families. It's about their friends, not about the people from the community that put them in power to serve them. So when I reflect on my leadership and what is happening, I find that that is the case. There is no leadership, there's rulership. And then as a leader, you also have to be able to communicate. And also remember that communication is a very complex process. I always tell this to my team, especially the managers, that when you're communicating with someone, your team members, remember that communication is complex. It's a two-way process. But also you need to remember that every time you're communicating with someone, they're coming from somewhere. They've got a background and they've got biases. So the message you're putting across is probably not what they're going to be hearing because, they've got their own background issues and their biases. So you may be saying, no, Senzile, let's go for lunch. But Senzile is not hearing that. He's hearing Rose is undermining me. Why is she inviting me for lunch? Yeah. Because he has a background and biases. So I always tell them that you need to be very careful when you're dealing with the team. And then also you need to work on your emotional intelligence. Because I believe there's a lot of emotional intelligence that is involved when dealing with people, which is, I think, the next book that I'm going to get you. I've seen a lot of books on emotional intelligence, and they really help in terms of understanding people and also understanding yourself, even the way that you then relate to people beyond your team, beyond your family. It really helps, which is what I see lacking in most of the leaders. They don't have that intelligence. So the decisions that they make and some of the actions that they take. There was a clip that I saw the other day where some ministers went to a place which had been scorched. There was a fire. So it was torched. And then they went there with sofas in the rubble, and then they were sitting there. And then the first thing that I said was, but they lack emotional intelligence. Yeah. You're going to a disaster scene, and you're going to sit on a sofa in the middle of the rubble. What does it say about your leadership? What does it say about you, your personality, your character as a person? How are you going to relate to the victim, the person who has lost all the property? It shows that you don't have emotional intelligence. Even if you're going to promise them anything, well, they're going to listen to you because you're coming in with this elitist approach. You're not really thinking about how does that person who has lost felt.
It reminds me of a person who lost a by-election in Matholen because each time they were going for campaigns and him and his family will carry cooler box and takeaways, and then the rest of the people were not taken care of, including his team. So people say, how do we vote for someone who eats on his own? Yes. Now imagine when he's in power. So it's such issues that really...
And what they need to remember is that leaders eat last, actually.
Yeah.
They're not the first ones to eat. So if you are a leader, you need to make sure that you take care of the welfare of your team. And then you then consider yourself. Because if you're going to be a leader who thinks about themselves, then it's going to be very difficult for you to motivate the team. Because they'll see you eating first, and then you leaving the breadcrumbs for the rest of the team. Make sure that you take care of your team for there to be that team spirit and for them to support you and to be motivated to work with you.
So you've been the helm of ZLHR. Zimbabwe has been transitioning from the so-called First Republic to the second. In these years, what would you say you've observed when it comes to the transition in terms of human rights, either being observed or not being observed?
Oh, yeah, it's been really interesting. But also for me, it has been the responses from other stakeholders around the shifts or the transitions or whatever they wanted to call it. So when I became the executive director of Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, that was in 2016 September, in an acting capacity, and then confirmed early in 2017. And then a few months later, that is when you get the so-called military-assisted transition. But for me, for all accounts and purposes, it was a coup d'etat because it had all the elements around how coup d'etats have happened in West Africa especially. But of course, I think there were other processes and factors that were then taken into consideration by those who wanted to sanitize it to be something else. But I think for the scholars, it was clear that it was a coup. What I have seen is during the first days after this transition, there was a lot of talk and a lot of commitment around how this Second Republic was going to be different from the First Republic, as they said. But for me, I wasn't convinced. Why I wasn't convinced is the way they came in. That was not a very constitutional process. The constitution is very clear in terms of how power is changed in Zimbabwe, and how leaders change or how rulers change. So they didn't follow the constitution. And then also from the experience in other countries, we have seen that if a government is changed through a military-assisted process or a coup d'etat, usually it has to be changed through that same process. And from what we've seen, things don't really get better that much. They can actually get worse. Because if you're dealing with the military, they've got a certain way that they operate, and they are not supposed to be dealing with civilians. So if they do not manage to fully integrate, then they are going to carry their rules and guidelines into civilian society, which becomes a problem. Like if you look in West Africa, then you have issues around people not being able to critique the military ruler who comes into power. I think I heard of a soldier in one of the countries, was it Burkina Faso or one of them, who criticized that they were failing to deal with some armed insurgents. And then when the new president from the military heard about it, he told him, no, you're a medical doctor, and you think we're failing to deal with this. Why don't you get the fatigue, the military fatigue, and go and fight and see what we're dealing with? So you see, someone was expressing themselves, but then they then found that there was no freedom after expression. Yeah. Now they were being conscripted to go and fight. So I've seen and observed that things don't get better. So I didn't really think that they would get better. But for me, it was because those who were coming into power were part of the old system. Because whoever came out was not running the country on his own. Robert Mugabe was not running the country on his own. He had a system, he had people. And we managed to get one person out of government, but the rest, the system and the structure remained. So there were promises initially. There was a mantra of, Zimbabwe being open for business, and that this new regime would, or this new government would look at things differently. So there was a bit of a honeymoon period from November, January, February, March, April, May. And actually, just before the elections that were due towards the end of July, there were very few violations that were recorded. Relatively less arrests, very fewer than before. But of course, they say a leopard does not change its spots. On 1 August, when the elections had been conducted and there were delays in announcing the results, that's when we really saw that, no, we had actually not really done much in terms of ensuring that there is reforms around human rights, respect for the Constitution, and respect for the concept of separation of powers. We then saw a very heavy-handed response to protests where they were calling on the release of election results. And I think what then followed, is something that is common knowledge and public knowledge, with civilians being shot at with live ammunition, and then someone also passed away on the streets of Harare because of that. And I think for me, it was the first time that I saw footage especially on social media, before there was no social media.
Yeah.
Which I think also made it quite difficult to understand why in that day and age and in this day and age, someone would openly shoot at someone where they know that they can be recorded and the footage can actually be circulated widely around the world, which is what happened. And then you then tended to see the violations that were there before around social and economic rights issues were not being addressed. Issues of right to water, right to education. But then also, we then had the pandemic, COVID-19, and there were also other violations associated with that. Freedom of expression, assembly, right to water issues, health. We were concerned about the welfare of the personnel in the health sector. They didn't have protective clothing and people were dying, There were so many deaths being recorded linked to COVID. And we didn't have a budget as a country, which had always been an issue before 2017. And after that, we need to make sure that we meet the 15% as set out in the Abuja Declaration for health services. And then more recently now you see that the resources are being diverted to buy vehicles for senior government officials, and yet you still have issues around maternal mortality within the hospitals. You don't have cancer machines. You don't have potable water for all citizens. So I would say we did not really get what we thought we were getting for those that protested to ensure that there was this transition. In fact, I think there's a joke that goes around that people of Zimbabwe sold the cow to take the donkey to the vet to be treated.
Yes.
So they thought that what they were doing was going to lead to a better and greater Zimbabwe. But for me, it's more of that the people did not change. There were no reforms after that. And it cannot be said to have been a transition, a proper transition, because, transitional justice is clear. There's a clear change in a certain way of running a country to a more democratic way, authoritarian to democratic. And in this case, it didn't happen like that. And also the sequencing of the mechanisms of transitional justice that were introduced did not really protect those who were supposed to be protected or benefiting from those processes. So I would say the human rights situation has not changed at all. Sometimes I feel that it's actually worse than it was, especially when you look at issues of civic space. We didn't have a law that sought to regulate and control organizations before. In fact, in 2004, President Mugabe refused to sign that law after he got legal counsel and advice from key stakeholders such as the United Nations. And in our case at the moment, many letters have been written about that law not being good for the country by special rapporteurs of the United Nations, but those have been ignored. So for me, we are not in a better situation where we were, but maybe 10 steps back.
You're talking about the rights and the international bodies. You've been to a number of various international forums, peer review processes, presenting these cases. So when you talk and there are Zimbabwean delegates from government and you present your case, the last one I saw you speaking in French. So after, do you guys meet with these guys and talk, or what happens after that?
Well, it really depends with the situation. Sometimes, like when we have side events, but sometimes we also have side events during the public sessions of the African. We invite them and they do come. And sometimes you meet them in the corridors, you acknowledge each other. But also, for me, I think being a taxpayer, and for every citizen being a taxpayer, and also having voted them into power, it is our responsibility to speak truth to power and to remind them that they are there for a purpose and they should be listening to us. And unfortunately, I think the challenge has been that for them, it's like they think that, no, we're exposing them, but no, we're not exposing them. We're actually trying to seek help for them because they have aligned themselves to some of these institutions by voluntarily agreeing to be bound by treaties. And the whole idea around some of these mechanisms and bodies is that they want to help member states to improve on the human rights situations in their countries. So they need credible, independent information to be able to actually help them to come up with reform recommendations or measures that they can actually recommend for the situation to improve in the country. But I've tended to find that sometimes with the states, they tend to be quite defensive, and they don't recognize that there is no country that has a perfect human rights record. But countries get better when they listen to advice and recommendations. And for us, actually, as an organization, we just don't go out there and start talking about some of these things. We start from the domestic level, through the press statements, through the position papers that we use to engage Parliament, and other interactions that we have. So our positions are always there and they're clear. And there's nothing new that we're going to be talking about there. Something that we've talked about, but we're not finding each other at home to meet and then agree on the reforms and to improve the human rights situation.
Do you think they listen to some of the things you do? Have you seen any improvements or recommendations that you've put forward being implemented?
We have seen some of the recommendations, but I would say the ones that they deem not to be too sensitive, or the ones that are aligned with their interests. You do see some of them, but not all of them. Of course, they pick and choose. And then sometimes you tend to find that they may refuse the recommendation and then somehow they do implement it. So you then start wondering, but why were they refusing that recommendation? But of course, for your own good, as long as it's implemented, whether it's something that had been rejected, then if it's furthering the interests of your constituents, that's the community, then it's better late than never.
I know in your career you've dealt with a lot of cases, a lot of incidents, but do you have any one case that you think really, challenged you emotionally, not even legally, but emotionally?
I refer back to 2008. There were a lot of abductions that happened of then MDC people. And I think one of the cases that still haunts me is when they abducted and disappeared a mother, a father, and a little child, a little boy. I think he was 2 or 3. And during the time that they were detained, because I then spoke to the mother and the father. During the time they detained the parents, they also detained the child. So he was then, we labeled him the youngest abductee, because he was like the youngest of the group. I think there were more than 26 in the end, including Justina Mkoko and some Zimbabwe Peace Project employees. But when the mother narrated the story of how they were doing the torture, they were torturing her and her son to make sure that she talks and her husband talks, I think that was the most horrific torture that I've heard about, because she was saying that they would take the child and put them in the fridge, a cold fridge, and then out again. And I thought, but this is a child, this is 3 years old. Why are you doing that to an innocent soul? So emotionally, I think that really, really challenged me. I was like, but how can people be so evil? If you want to deal with the parent, deal with the parent. Why the child? That's an innocent soul. And then also, why are you using these archaic methods? Torture is outlawed under international law. You cannot torture someone. And in fact, for most of those who continue to use torture, you can actually be prosecuted in another country because it's an international crime. Even if you're saying Zimbabwe is not criminalized torture, you can be prosecuted by another country, in another country, by other stakeholders. So I just wondered how that happened, and it really, that's when I saw that people can be very evil.
You've also had some moments of victory. And what would you say is the victory that really reminded you that your work matters?
Well, I would say one of the cases is a very funny case. You may not see it like that. I think you've seen the high-profile ones. But we had a case of one of the chiefs in Esgodini, actually. So he fined one of these widows some cattle because she didn't follow some traditional rites and rituals when her husband was buried. So he then fines her. And then she finds a way to us, and then we take up the case, and then we challenge the chief, and he's told to return the cattle to the woman, the widow. He was not happy with us. Well, the chief was not happy. He then took us to the High Court. Now, he was the applicant, and we were the respondents, because now he was saying we were challenging his authority. That was in 2015, and I think he then probably got wise counsel somewhere, and then he just let the case die a natural death. So I thought that was really like an impact where we manage to help someone and then someone feels challenged. He asserts his rights, but he knows that he has a limit.
Yeah.
So I think that also set an example to him. And I'm sure that when he meets the other chiefs, he tells them that, no, there's certain things that you cannot do, especially to the vulnerable women. So I found that to be one of the most powerful cases where we were also challenged, and we thought it was really good that people know that if they are not happy with us, they go to the judiciary as an institution to protect their rights.
You know, like we are talking about these cases, and many Zimbabweans will know ZLHR from the public side of work, the work that you do, the press statements, the litigation. But I guess a lot behind the scenes also happens. And what would you say are some of the behind scenes, you know, that probably have even changed the way you see things and maybe the course of your life?
So I was born in September, you know. And I associate myself with a certain star sign, so I've got certain characteristics. I used to be very short-circuited, very impatient. But then when you're working in a team, eventually you have to adapt. They say that if you can't change for the team is going to change you.
Yeah.
So in my case, I think working with my team over the years, I've realized that I need to step back and also see things the way they see them and be in their shoes sometimes for us to work as a team. So I've become very patient with them, and I've become generally very patient in life. And also, I used to be quite opinionated, particularly around my documents being perfect, perfectionist, which sometimes does not work. So I've had to do a lot of adjustments, but also to see things differently and also try and step back and be in their shoes to see what is happening. I would also say sometimes when we are doing some of those cases, there's a lot of discussion and conversations that go on and a lot of arguments. I have an open door policy, so most of the staff members will just walk in at any time. We discuss issues, we argue sometimes. But what we have always done is, even if we argue internally and we don't agree on something, when we go out, we are united. So with that united front, so that has really changed me, even the way, like when I'm dealing with conflicts, not just within the organization, but even in my family or with other colleagues in other networks. I always tell them that, no, we have a very good president at my organization. We can fight, argue internally, but we have to be constructive. And then when we go out, we should be united. You know, we are one team. Yeah. And you cannot come and then start saying, this your team member is, we'll defend that team member, even if we know they are wrong.
Yeah, so earlier on you talked about, you know, working in the space, you know, being a leader, being a woman, and there's a lot of challenge. But the work that you do, human rights and the organization that you work for, had to obviously maybe had some certain sacrifices that you have made. Do you have any sacrifices that you had to make for you to take up the work that you do?
With human rights work and with the type of work that the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights does, and the mandate that it has, and the expectations from the beneficiaries and the stakeholders, it's very difficult to have a normal work-life balance. So over the years, I realized that I missed out on the time, like when my son was growing up. He had to grow up very fast because I used to work late and sometimes I had to travel a lot. So he had to learn to cook eggs very fast so that he wouldn't starve sometimes. He was at boarding school, and then when he comes, sometimes I had to get one of my brothers to babysit him. So I missed out when he was growing up. I didn't have a lot of time with him, like, you know, going on vacation with your son or just spending time chatting. So for me, I made that sacrifice, and I always tell my team members at the moment that they have to create a work-life balance, and that they need to make sure that they spend more time with their children, because once they grow up, it will be too late for them to try and make up that time. So that sacrifice for me probably is something that I completely regret, that I should have tried to strike a balance. But at one time it was very difficult, you know, to strike the balance. And then also, just thinking back, if you're in a certain position, there are so many eyes watching you. There's a lot of surveillance. So you need to be careful who you associate with. And also because there's this general concern around infiltration, co-opting people. You want to be hanging around the right people because you don't want to be hanging around someone who is going to be passing on messages on what you're doing and compromising your safety and security. So you make a lot of sacrifices. You have to think about who you're associating with, your friends. So in the end, you end up limiting your circle to people that you trust, but also people that you know that no matter what, they'll always stand by you. So a lot of sacrifices, and also a lot of sacrifices around vacation. Sometimes you have to work over breaks. Sometimes you sacrifice just your sleeping hours because you have to work overtime to fundraise, to catch up on work. And people will not understand that this is a demanding job. Actually, when I look at some of my colleagues in private practice, they think they work more than me, but they don't know that I have to work more for less because it's more of the passion than the dollar, actually.
With all these pressures, was there any point where you said, no, I'm leaving? Did you ever consider quitting the job?
Not when I was a director, actually. I never really considered that. But I started to think about my time as a leader in terms of how long it should be. Because I have always thought that with leadership, there has to be a term limit, a time limit for you to be effective. Organizations change, people change, and then also the circumstances change. And I always believe that leaders are effective when they are running an institution for a certain number of years. And then afterwards, it becomes routine. And sometimes you find that it's very difficult to innovate because you're so set in your ways. But also, it's very difficult for you to work with the team because sometimes they feel like you may be blocking their progress, There's no vacancy at the top. You need to create room for them.
So there's no way up.
Yes. So you also need to create that room for them to grow. But also you need to make sure that the organization grows. And you can't have the monopoly of all the ideas. And also with what is happening now, you need to give the next generation the opportunity to be able to lead some of these institutions. I think we've seen what happened in Tanzania, what happened in Kenya, that the younger generation may have bolder and different ideas to how we've been doing things. And we should give them time to lead. And as a leader, you should know, they say a good dancer knows when to leave the stage. You should know when to leave.
I hope a lot of people are listening to this. So what would be some of the misunderstood kind of work that you do, What are some of the misconceptions around the work that you do?
I think some of the misconceptions, one of the main misconceptions is the fact that people think that we are partisan, that we support a certain political party. We don't support any political party at all. What we look at is the issue. Is there a human rights issue when a case comes to us? And will this case fit into our case selection strategy? That's what we look at. But unfortunately, because in certain cases, there are people from a certain political persuasion who then get victimized and targeted, and they're the ones that you have to represent, then people will think, no, these lawyers are partisan, they support the opposition. We don't support any political party. If you look at some of the cases we've done, we've represented war veterans when they were protesting. We've also represented a lot of people across the political divide in social and economic rights cases, environmental related human rights challenges around the mining, around the pollution, and many others, the farm evictions. If you remember the case of the Arnold Farm case, the case that was in Mazoe, where, of course, I think you would know because of the constituents who the majority of the people belonged to in terms of political persuasion. So we don't. So that misconception around Zimbabwe's human rights being politicized is rather unfortunate because people refuse to look at the work that we do. And then also as an organization, I think there is also a misconception that we are very difficult to reach. We are not difficult to reach at all. We can be reached through the hotlines. And also we are a very flexible team. As long as it's a human rights case, then we'll take it up. So I would say those are some of the key misconceptions, especially the political partisanship and then how to reach us. It's very simple to reach Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights. And we do our work around the country, I think, which is also another issue, that some people think that we're just based in Harare, Bulawayo and Mutare. No, we have members around the country who are doing the work. And we go out to communities around you call us, you want us to do a community engagement, a mobile legal clinic to educate you on rights, for you to get access to lawyers, we'll come there and we'll be able to assist. And I'm sure when I leave, my team will continue to do that work, because it's part of our strategy in terms of engaging communities and seeing how we can leave our mark and foster a culture of human rights in Zimbabwe.
You know, from the time you joined the ZLHR to becoming a director, the organization went through a number of political seasons. The Mugabe era, 2017, COVID, 2019. What would you say has been maybe was the most challenging season for you?
I would say the days around the coup d'etat, for me personally, at a personal level, it was very challenging, because I was really worried about what was going to happen, because I had read a lot about the coup d'etats in West Africa during my master's module. And then also because I spent time at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. And during that time, I was a legal researcher in one of the trial chambers. It was actually trial chamber 3 for the judge president then, Judge Byron, who was from St. Kitts and Nevis, that island, very exotic place. So I'd read a lot of testimonies around what happened in Rwanda, the genocide and what was happening. So I was worried that there was going to be, if this situation was not contained, like I think for the first week, I had this very long couch where I would be watching TV every day. Like for the first time, I watched ZBC a lot, because I was trying to follow what was happening with the coup. Was everyone going to be safe? I was worried about my family, the communities and everyone, and that there would not be any bloodshed. So that for me was really challenging at a personal level, that uncertainty and not knowing what was happening to the country. And then during COVID-19 era, it was also difficult because you had a team of lawyers out there that you were potentially exposing to harm and risk. And then we had, unfortunately, one of our members who passed away from COVID. He was not really active with our work, but that affected us a lot in terms of just how fickle we were as lawyers. And of course, everyone dies, but that was really scary. And I think the last one, there were quite a number of them that challenged me, was 2019, during the 2-week period where they arrested more than 1,400 people. When we had those spontaneous protests around the country, that was really challenging, because now you have a lean team and you have to be dealing with those cases. And also we were facing challenges around the way the judiciary was responding to the cases. We felt that there was some influence. And of course, as lawyers, naturally, we went out and protested against that. I think, if you recall, we had these placards talking about, please do not militarize the courts. We want an independent judiciary, because of the pattern and trends that we're seeing at the courts, where there was a lot of fast tracking and conviction, and difficulty for lawyers to actually then be able to fully represent some of these people. So I would say, very turbulent times, but also very fulfilling in terms of being able to respond, react, and assist people with the team, and also the member lawyers around the country.
So when the story of ZLHR is told, and there will be a chapter about your work, what do you want people to remember you for?
Well, I want them to remember me as being one of the first female Black directors, because I was one of the first female Black directors. The other one was not my color. But also as someone who was very resilient, fearless. I think I'm fearless. Definitely I am fearless. And also someone who was very committed, because for me it was not about the money. It's more about the passion and the need to serve and wanting to serve the people. But I also want people to remember that it was a very difficult time for me, because of the nature of the society, how the society is wired, patriarchal. So a very difficult and turbulent time for me. But I do hope that I will encourage other young women, because when I became the director, I think that was almost 10 years ago, 9 years something. I was slightly younger, no gray hairs, but definitely a little bit. I think I would fit into the bracket of youth. Our youth is quite extended. So I've also been encouraged to see that there are young female leaders taking up the space and leading institutions. So there's the issue around patriarchy and my challenges, but also the fact that if you are going to lead certain institutions and even a country, you need to be a servant leader. That I want people to remember, and how I tried to emulate some of those values around servant leadership. And then lastly, I would want people to continue to remember me for speaking truth to power. I think you've seen me. I speak truth to power. But also what I do is I believe that I don't raise my voice, but I improve my argument. And that is something that follows me from my childhood. When I was very small, I grew up with my siblings. There are 3 of us who are like 2 years apart. And then when we were growing up and playing around, sometimes we would irritate each other and then start shouting at each other. And then my father would just come out and then he would ask, so who is that who is speaking like the devil? So, it would naturally just constrain you. So it has been something that has also guided me even during my leadership, that I don't shout at people. I don't raise my voice. I improve my argument. And then I get my message across. And I've always told people that when you are writing even a statement, try sometimes to tone down on the words that you use, because you want the next person to read. So improve your argument and speak truth to power. So I would really I hope people will remember me for that. But also being one of the directors who really loved to have fun, but a different kind of fun. Adrenaline. I've bungee jumped.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
I've skydived.
Yeah.
I've done the gorge swing, and I've done the zip line. So yeah, I'm still trying to tick off my bucket list to see what else I can do, which is fun.
I've seen the pictures, the bungee jump, the skydiving, and I said, these are the things that I will never do because I'm scared of heights and all those kind of things. But what had that to do with, just dealing with emotions, or you just said, I'm going to go for this?
Well, I think it's probably in my DNA, but it's also a way of releasing some of the stress. It's quite liberating when you do some of those things. So I've enjoyed it, actually. You feel very different perspective. And then you also feel that there's no challenge that you cannot, there's nothing that is insurmountable. You feel that you can actually conquer almost everything. But also, like for me, when dealing with stress, I've taken on a more mellow activity. I love massage. So I do go for massage once in a while, just to get the tension out of my body. And I believe probably that's one of the gaps that we have in our sector around wellness and taking care of yourself, the body. It's probably something that I would encourage leaders to think about. How do you take care of your body, your wellness beyond? Because we are experiencing a lot, and there are a lot of expectations from everyone, the stakeholders, the beneficiaries, the partners, and even the government. They're looking up to see what you're doing. So if you don't do anything, they think, oh no, we've managed to subdue them, which is wrong, because you are a watchdog. And if you are in that leadership role, leading a watchdog institution, then take care of your body so that you're always able to then tackle any challenges.
The people always talk about the silent wars that you fight and you never tell someone. And I think talking to you, I felt like maybe one of the issues of the patriarchy, some of those wars. But what are some of the, you were in the male-dominated space, you were young, but what are some of those silent wars that you've fought and you've really never talked about?
Some of the silent wars that you fight are issues of feeling very isolated, actually. You feel isolated sometimes. You don't have time to connect with family. So you tend to find yourself isolated. And then you also tend to find that you don't have too many friends. So that loneliness, not just being in leadership, but also, at that level, you want to have a normal life. So that can really get to you sometimes. But also the other silent wars is you have to sacrifice a lot And sometimes you think, is it really worth it to continue with this fight? But of course, because you are passionate about it. And then also you do have silent wars of sometimes having challenges within the institutions. The institution can be not as functional as you want because of the fact that some of the structures are not working well. And you have to fix it. And you have to deal with it. So that really creates a lot of pressure on you that can actually make or break someone.
So as you take a back step and look at the future, but still in the space, what are some of the worrying human rights trends that you see when it comes to violations these are new emerging issues that we never observed before?
I wouldn't say new emerging. The only issues that are not really emerging, but that are more prominent now, or where people are taking more action, are the environmental related rights violations. They've always been there, particularly with the mining. But I think it's also because of the intensity of what is happening. And then I would say the intention to possibly amend the constitution. For now, it's still a rumor and a resolution. But I would say that is really worrying. It's not new, but it's a pattern, a trend from the past. But perhaps I would say that the desire and the effort to control the different sectors by this government is quite worrying. Because I do worry that we're going to change into a society where there's no freedom of expression, there's no dissent, where everyone is now thinking around, thinking the same, which is wrong. Because a society can only thrive when there's diversity of views and there's tolerance. So I do feel that there's a lot of work that is being put and a lot of effort to ensure that, as people say, there's capture of all sectors. And with the PVO Amendment Bill and Amendment Act now, it seems like they want to control the sector. So you don't have independent voices that are going to make recommendations around what to improve, what to do, how to make the country better. But people who are now singing the same hymn as them in terms of things are okay, people who are deemed to be patriotic, which I also feel like is an illusion, because patriotism is not supposed to be blind patriotism where you just follow and you love someone or you love a country despite what is happening in that country. But we need to have what I call constructive patriotism. Not what I call, what I've read as constructive patriotism, which is where you should be able to speak out and say where things are wrong, but still be considered to be patriotic because you love your country and you want to see improvements. So I would say 2030 is worrying. And then also the fact that nothing much is being done to control the mining and ensure that it benefits the communities. So we are getting the same violations from right before the colonial era, where there was plunder of our natural resources and we were not benefiting. But now it's just different players.
Yeah, you mentioned two important issues, the 2030 issue, the mining issue, and you are almost exiting the stage at a time where civil society is under siege. There is not only from the PVO Act and all these kind of pressures, corruption, but also from even an international point of view, the rise of the right wing, the reduction in donor funding, changing of foreign policy, for this government, and funding is non-existent. People are struggling to survive. What would be your advice to someone who's a director right now and worried about next year?
I would say that they have a lot of opportunity to be creative around sustaining the institutions. And for me, they need to come up with sustainability strategies if they don't have them, but it may be too late. Ordinarily, an organization should start thinking about sustainability beyond donor funding when they are formed, when they're established. They should start thinking into the future. And I would say there are so many sources of funding outside the usual funding models. So they need to come up with different funding models. And this can even include the diaspora as a source of funding. But they can also look at issues of income generation. What skills do they have for them to generate income to plow back into the programming? And also think about other sources that they've never thought about before. So if they were relying on maybe governments to fund their work, how diverse can they be? And who can they reach out to? And can they also think around even volunteerism, encouraging members of the community to volunteer and join their work? So I would say they need to be creative. They need to think outside the box. But this is the time which is going to make or break their organizations, because they need to think, and they need to think like leaders.
So you've according to the Bible, Paul, you say you've run a good race. Now you are reflecting and you're sitting back and saying, probably there's one story that you've really never told anyone, but you feel like you are ready to talk about one issue that you've really never talked about publicly, and you need to talk about it. Reflecting on the work, what are some of the one or two issues that you feel like, you know what, people need to know about this?
No, there are so many. I'm trying to think, like, which one would I? Oh, yes, there's actually a story that happened. So in 2013, we had a meeting of lawyers to decide on the litigation strategy after the elections. For somehow we thought there were issues around the election management. And then the minutes of that meeting found their way into the state-controlled media. And then they were being released in installments every day. And then the last day, they released all the minutes. So that was just before the elections. And then I was attending a meeting with some of these network members on election observation, and we were briefing the African Union observers on the situation, because they wanted a briefing for them to appreciate before they went out to observe the elections in the field. So I was sitting in that meeting, and I think I was just too overwhelmed, because at that time, my son was at boarding school. So I would, when they were releasing the minutes, I would leave work and then go home. I didn't have anyone to talk to about that situation, because I was really disturbed. But I think one of the things that really irritated me was I had tried to make sure that when I typed my minutes out, there were no typos. And then when they decided to release the whole installment of minutes, they were releasing the excerpts. And then when they released the whole document, there were so many grammatical errors. So one, I was upset about that. Like, how do they break the English that I managed to clean up? Like, you were just supposed to copy like you were doing. And then I was so overwhelmed because I didn't have anyone to talk to about, but how did those minutes leak? Because I also felt like I was violated, There was someone who was taking information and then releasing it or giving it away, which was very wrong, because that was supposed to be a very closed meeting of lawyers. So when I then started to share information around some of the issues the observers wanted to know, I then reserved the issues around attacks on lawyers last. So one of my colleagues then said, I realized the way that you were talking, because they are so time-bound, they don't have too much time when they come and ask you questions about what is happening in the pre-election environment. So I started talking very slowly, and then...
You're okay?
No, I'm not okay. No, you can pick up where you left off.
Okay.
That is my camera.
Okay. Should I continue? So I started to speak very slowly about everything else, the reforms that needed to be done, what they'd done. And then I wanted to now start talking about attacks on lawyers. So it was a very personal experience for me, because I'm the one who convened the meeting, and I shared the minutes with the lawyers. And then when I started to try and talk about it, I just burst out crying in front of the observers. It was quite embarrassing, but I think it also showed the human side of me, this is a situation that was bottling up, and suddenly I'm in front of the observers from the African Union. They want to know about the situation, and then there I am just letting it all out. So I had a scarf, and then I had to cover myself and walk out of the room. And people were so worried. They were sending me little notes. Rose, you're so strong. What is happening? It was like, but I've got this human side to me. Of course, I had to stop, and then I had to go back and start presenting again. But I also feel like they also got a sense in terms of the toll that some of these violations have on people. no matter how strong you may feel like you are, sometimes they can break you, but you have to be resilient.
So finally, if you were to talk to the young Rose who joined the Law Society and ended up the director, and talking to her and other young ladies and young people who want to follow that path, what would you say?
Well, I would say that the sky is the limit, and I always would encourage them to be up for the challenge. But perhaps what I would say is they probably need to prepare themselves more for leadership. Because for me, it was learning along the way, and I had a learning mind. But nowadays, you have a lot of opportunity to be mentored. Choose a mentor, which I didn't have. I had to figure it out on my own, consult people. But also say to them, you should be open to learning and that you should be humble. And you should always treat everyone with respect. No matter how low level your team member is, you should always respect people.
Thank you, Rose, for sharing your story, your experience. I think I find it not only inspiring but educational as well. But for me, the reflection is, I've always called you for many other things, and a lot of other people have done so. But we have never worried that how are you taking all these things? And maybe, which brings me to something. Do you think you have lifetime trauma with all these emotions that you have been dealing with all these cases? Are you going to completely forget everything that happened, or you're going to carry it along and it is going to shape who you're going to be in your next journey?
I do believe that to completely forget about my experience is going to be difficult, but I think it's going to shape me in terms of how I'm going to grow in this field of human rights or any other field that I choose. It has shaped me, and it has really given me a different perspective around life, around work, and around family. So, and I also hope that my story is going to inspire other young ladies and young girls that the sky is the limit, and we need to deal with patriarchy as we see fit. And we need to make sure that the next generation of children do know that women and girls should be given the same opportunity.